in the upper left, that's where I am right now. I'm in Badolato, and I'm in a house that is basically right here. Okay, so you're looking out sort of over the edge of the village down onto the Ionian Sea. So again, this area is covered with Greek ruins, very sort of just genial people, excellent food culture, and beautiful sea, which is kind of the point of being down here. This is basically we're at the beach for a couple weeks. So this is kind of a quick overview of Badolato, and then when we get together next time, we'll go deeper into this area to explore and make some calabrese recipes. Today, though, we're going to jump up to Rome, which was, as y'all probably know, famously built on 7 hills. It was founded by Romulus and Remus on April 21st, 753 BC, and the archaeological evidence of the first foundation of Rome is at this bend of the Tiber River, the base of the Palatine Hill, and that's the location of the Roman Forum. When you're in Rome, you see all sorts of references to the ancient Rome, the foundation of ancient Rome and the empire. So you can see the twins, Romulus and Remus, who are being suckled by the she-wolf. And then the other photo is literally a contemporary manhole cover. So SPQR, Senatus Populusque Romanum, is still going strong. The sort of continuity of history in Rome is just kind of shocking. We're zeroing in a little bit on the historic center of Rome. Some of the things we're going to look at today are the Coliseum here, which y'all are very familiar with, I am sure. And then over here in Rione Parione, the Pantheon. Here's Piazza Navona. Here's the pedestrian bridge that goes over to the Mausoleum of Hadrian, Castel Sant'Angelo. And then, of course, Vatican City with the Basilica of San Pietro and the Piazza San Pietro. Quick look at some of those major monuments from ancient Rome. We're going to talk about Gianlorenzo Bernini and how he transformed the city of Rome, but I'm going to start with a couple of images of some of the major ancient monuments and major monuments of the city. This is a close-up of the Coliseum, which I'm sure everyone's very familiar with, even if you've never been to Rome. And I have a little quick refresher of the architectural orders from ancient days up here. So we'll be looking at some architecture. Bernini was a sculptor and an architect and literally transformed the face of the city. So it's interesting to see he was using the ancient orders. So Doric columns have the kind of very simple capital here. The base level of the Colosseum actually uses the Doric order. I'm showing you the upper 3 registers, and you're looking here at, this is a pilaster. It's a column that's actually not freestanding. It's attached to the building itself. So this is a pilaster with an Ionic column. Above that, the next register up is a pilaster with a Corinthian column, rounded pilaster, and then the top register is a flat pilaster with a Corinthian capital, excuse me. Here's the Pantheon. This was built in 120 AD. The Colosseum was built in 72 AD, begun by the Emperor Vespasian. This is 120 AD, the great Pantheon built by Marcus Agrippa. The Romans invented concrete, and what was cool about that is that its concrete is very, very strong and very, very light. So compared to the building materials that they were using before they invented concrete, stone and brick, concrete made it possible to do things like build this enormous dome. So this, again, is the Pantheon. You can see some of the dome here. It's kind of hard to capture in one photograph. And then you're looking at the interior of the dome. And to further lighten the structure, they've actually used these coffers, which are quite beautiful as decoration, but it also considerably lightens that material that's up there. So in order to span this enormous space, concrete was necessary. This was the largest dome in the world. It is still the largest unreinforced concrete dome. Is that a question? Yes? Sorry, we have a little reverb. So this dome was such a feat of engineering that it became the reference for architects centuries and centuries later. So this was built in 120 AD when Brunelleschi designed the dome of the Duomo in Florence in the 1400s. He came to Rome to study this. When Bramante and Michelangelo were working on St. Peter's in the 1500s, they came over to the Pantheon to study this. Also, take a look here at the way the orders are used. We're going to talk a little bit about architecture. So the columns with their Corinthian capitals are supporting an architrave. a very simple architrave in this very simple, strong, solid, triangular pediment. When we get into Baroque architecture, they really kind of explode that pediment out. It gets very exuberant. So we'll be looking at that. And then, of course, here is St. Peter's. This is the Basilica of St. Peter. It's actually built on the tomb of St. Peter. This is the second building on this site. The first building on this site was built in the 4th century AD by the Emperor Constantine. Again, smallish, relatively small church. This thing is enormous. So relatively small church on top of the tomb of St. Peter. St. Peter was martyred right about here, and his tomb is right here, smack dab under the dome, and that's where the high altar of the church is. So in 1506, they decided, instead of renovating for the 1000th time this 4th century AD church, they were going to build a spectacular new structure. And it took 120 years to build this structure. Architects such as Michelangelo, Bramante, Maderno worked on this, and then Gianlorenzo Bernini, who we're going to focus on today, was actually given the title of kind of master of works of the Vatican. When he took over, the building itself was built, and his mark is mostly some decoration on the interior. I say decoration, large, humongous structures on the interior. And then he designed the colonnade here, which describes the Piazza of St. Peter's. Here is Bernini, Gianlorenzo Bernini. He was actually born in Naples in 1598 to a sculptor called Pietro. When he was a kid, the family moved to Rome. So he was basically born into a sculpture workshop in Rome, which means he had great instruction. He had access to all sorts of materials. He participated in big commissions. And of course, as he grew, he met people and ended up sort of knowing all of these folks who became very, very important patrons of his. His name is literally synonymous with Baroque. He became the greatest sculptor of the 1600s. He's also an architect, an urban planner, and his name is sort of linked to the Baroque period and linked to Rome because of how much he really did transform the city. He was known as kind of a beautiful man, very fiery temperament apparently, and is also a witty conversationalist. So keep that in mind when you see some of the patrons that he deals with. He was hanging out with some of the greatest intellects of the day, and literally having a drink with the Pope. So he was able to kind of move between all of these very important patrons. He was also very spiritual. He attended daily mass. And he took into consideration the teachings of the church, and specifically how the church approached art and the place of art in the church. So let's go back here. He designed then, this is the enclosure. The colonnade is an enclosure for the Piazza San Pietro. This was built way later, after the building was complete. The building was actually completed in the 1620s. 40 years later, Pope Alexander VII Kiji decided that they needed to kind of formalize that spot out front because the papal audiences drew such a huge crowd. They needed to describe the space without actually closing it. And so Bernini is in charge of that. And he decides to build this colonnade. There's 4 columns, colonnade, that, as he described it, the first part here, the rounded part, is like the arms of the mother church, welcoming the pilgrims, welcoming the faithful. And then this trapezoidal forecourt, which you'll notice is almost square, but it's not. And the reason for that is when you're on the ground, it really creates a very interesting kind of dramatic experience as you enter the church or as you exit the church. So when you're on the ground, it kind of looks like this. So this is a feat of design in that it very, very kind of quietly defines this space. It doesn't compete with the church at all. It's also not overwhelmed by the church. The proportions here are unbelievable. So he had to somehow, describe this enormous amount of space and work in harmony with this incredibly, incredibly large church facade designed by someone else 100 years ago. In addition to the colonnades, which you can see here, there's sculpture all across the top. So Bernini, of course, has a workshop. He designs everything. He does small clay models, and then he gives his artisans the task of actually reproducing in full size. There are hundreds of statues. These are 3 times life size. Here's a closer view. Notice the scale. Here are these little people, the enormous columns with their Doric capitals. This is a very solid, strong, kind of somber procession up to the church. So Bernini really had a great eye for, like I said, urban planning. He kind of saw the forest and not just the trees. The brilliance of this and the way that he was able to harmonize with the church is just amazing. And he kind of prepares your experience. So as you're walking through this nice, somber, solid colonnade, and you end up, of course, going into the church, which is kind of a shock. Here you are in the interior of St. Peter's. We're going to talk about Bernini's works here, which are concentrated in the back end of the church. Of course, this is the Piazza, Bernini's Colonnade. We're going to talk first about the crossing. The crossing means where the transept crosses the nave, right here. There are 4 enormous piers. This is weight-bearing piers that are holding up the dome, okay? So there are lots of it's a structural purpose for these humongous piers, which he, of course, decorated and kind of lightened up. And then the main altar, the high altar of the church, is right here in the crossing under the dome and on top of the tomb of St. Peter. And that's what you're looking at here, the baldacchino, which is here on top of the altar. And then usually in a church, the high altar is in the apse. In this case, the high altar is placed over the tomb of St. Peter, and so it's right here at the crossing. But that just kind of leaves a problem in a sense with the apse. So pilgrims who come to this church, they kind of arrive and their focal point goes right through the baldacchino and to the apse of the church. And we'll, in just a minute, we'll see what Bernini chose to put down there. So when you come into the church, I'm standing right about here when I took this photograph, and you can see this structure. It's called the baldacchino. A baldacchino is a ceremonial canopy. And if you look on the bottom right of this slide, you'll see a very humble canopy baldacchino that is being processed along with the priest through a small town in southern Italy. He's carrying the monstrance for the feast of Ecce Homo. And you can see that there are these little kind of flaps on the canopy, you know? So Bernini decided to demarcate the sacred space of the tomb of St. Peter. He put up a ceremonial canopy, only this time it's in bronze, in gilt bronze. He repeated the little kind of flaps effect up at the top, and then he placed the whole thing on these Solomonic columns. Again, take a look at the scale here. These are the people, okay? The baldacchino is 4 stories tall. It's 66 feet tall, and that's a lot of bronze. So he designed this absolutely gorgeous canopy. He chose to use Solomonic columns, those twisty columns, which are so interesting to look at, and they have always symbolized sacred space. This kind of column, this twisty column, was used in the first temple in Jerusalem in the Old City, the Temple of Solomon, which is why we call them Solomonic columns. Bernini also, so this is about 1630 when he designed this structure to demarcate the high altar, the tomb of St. Peter here in the Vatican in St. Peter's. And he had just been given a very large promotion by his boss. His boss is Urban VIII Barberini, Pope Urban VIII, from the Barberini family. Urban was a extremely important patron for Bernini. And Bernini kind of gave a nod to his patron, and he used the Barberini family symbols here on the columns. You can see laurel leaves, and then of course bumblebees. So the bumblebee is kind of a Barberini family symbol, and you can see those up here. He also, if you look at the roof, the ceiling here, excuse me, of the baldacchino, you see the angel of the Holy Spirit with these gilt bronze rays of light coming out. That is a classic Bernini motif, and you'll see that repeated again and again. So we're in the crossing at the baldacchino, a larger, wider view of the crossing. Here's the baldacchino that we were just looking at kind of up close. And it's right here in the center. Here's the main altar. So we're in the crossing, and you can see 2 of these enormous, massive piers that are holding up the weight of the dome. They're decorated with reliquaries. So they hold pieces of saints. and it can be anything. St. Helena, the mother of Constantine here, she of course found the true cross. So usually a reliquary with a statue of St. Helen will have a bit of the true cross. It might be a bone. Sometimes there's the arm bone of the saint. Reliquaries, you know, they're kind of popular back then. So they're still popular today. So those 4 piers hold reliquaries of different saints. And again, Bernini designed the entire decorative program, and then had workshop help to do this. However, the statue you're looking at on the right is Saint Longinus. He actually did, in fact, sculpt this himself, Gianlorenzo Bernini. The statues are about 14 feet tall, so greater than life size, and they're in these niches right here. And if you look at it, they're actually interacting with the altar and with the baldacchino themselves. So they're all sort of, they're kind of helping you then also focus on the tomb of St. Peter and the high altar of this church. And if you look at, if you keep in mind that for the decorative program, and then look actually at Longinus, he is the Roman centurion who was present at the crucifixion. He's holding the spear, and what you're seeing is the moment that he realizes what has happened here. And what has happened is that the Romans have killed the Son of God, and he has just realized that. So think about Bernini now is in tune with the kind of program of decoration for the church. He knows what the Council of Trent stated, which is that art is to educate parishioners, it's to invite reflection and inspire piety, and that is what he's doing. If Bernini is doing any religious work, architecture, or art, he's got that in mind. So y'all keep that in mind too as you're looking at his works. So let's move down into the apse. Okay, so remember the high altar is in the crossing, which means the apse is empty. The apse cannot be empty. The pilgrims come to St. Peter's, the apse cannot be empty. And here's the apse. This in itself is a reliquary. A lot of times reliquaries are about this big, and there's a little piece of an arm bone in there or something. This is an enormous reliquary. And what you're looking at is this big bronze chair, and it's the container for a small wooden chair. And it's the throne of St. Peter, and it's enclosed inside this big bronze chair. So what we've got here is this monument with this reliquary, and Bernini has chosen to mix media. He's used bronze, and he's used a lot of bronze. There's over 80 tons of bronze in this monument. He's also used some gesso for those clouds. He's got some marble angels. He's got stained glass, natural light. That is, Bernini always makes use of natural light when he can. You can see it here. And then it's hard to make out because it's kind of bleached out in the photo, but that's the dove of the Holy Spirit. And again, those great gilt bronze rays of light that just shoot out from the Holy Spirit. So focusing down on the cathedra, the throne of St. Peter, you can see it's kind of hovering. He's got this effect where 80 tons of bronze is literally kind of hovering, and it's being held up by 4 of the doctors of the church. So let's zoom in on that. And you can see that each doctor basically has one finger under a leg of this chair. So 85 tons of bronze are kind of being levitating here. So Bernini kind of likes that illusion. And again, for some scale, let's see, I have to go back and check my notes here. 80 tons of bronze. The doctors, this is 18 feet tall, the doctors of the church, and the whole thing together is 50 feet tall. So again, just quite imposing. And then here, this is St. Augustine. You can see him, and you can see how his finger literally is just holding up the throne of St. Peter. Very nice, dramatic monument. This was done, those works in St. Peter's were done relatively late in Bernini's career. He got started very early. As I said, he was born into this sculpture studio. He was literally a child prodigy. So he was very good. He was given commissions. And these are some sculptures that Bernini did at the age of 11. 11 on the left and 13, the 2 on the right. So you can see he was quite the amazing sculptor. And he gained notice of these very important patrons who were working with his father's studio as well. So he quite naturally came into this group of large patrons. I have no idea why there's this little red thing right here. It's bugging me, but I can't make it go away. This is another early commission, age 20 at this point though, he's not 13, he's 20. A Spanish cardinal asked him to sculpt the blessed soul and the damned soul. So here you can see that Bernini, age 20, not only is able to conceive of this commission and show this woman who's kind of transcended into another realm, and then this man who's just being eaten alive with suffering. The beauty of his sculpting too is just over the top. He gained a lot of notice for this. I want y'all to focus just on the textures here. Look at the texture of the kind of coarse curly hair of the damned soul, the man there on the right. Then look at the skin that's kind of pulled over his cheekbone. And then look at his tongue. His tongue has the texture of a tongue. Brilliant. Also, as a very young sculptor, within 3 years, Bernini started sculpting groups and figures like this for Scipione Borghese, who was trying to basically decorate his family villa, which is now the Villa Borghese, which is one of the most important museums in Rome. This is the sculpture of David. It's a life-size sculpture commissioned by Scipione Borghese in 1623. And you can see this sort of the apotheosis of Baroque art. So all of this motion, all of these diagonals, the fact that there's not one single viewpoint, you have to walk all the way around this sculpture to kind of take it all in, to see everything. And then look at the face of David, the courage, bravery, concentration. He's screwing up all of his courage and all of his strength, and he's going to sling that slingshot and kill Goliath. Just do a quick look at, this is kind of art history 101, the progression of David's. It's interesting here that turning back and looking at ancient art really had a huge effect on the progression of sculpture, and that happened kind of during the Renaissance. So what you're looking at on the left is Donatello's very, very early Renaissance kind of breakthrough sculpture, 1434. This is Donatello depicted as the Bible describes him, 12-year-old boy. And what's a breakthrough about this is the pose of the figure. It's called contrapposto, in that this single leg is weight-bearing, which means that this knee can pop out. And then once this knee is out, the hip goes up, the shoulders kind of sway. So you've got a lot of movement in the figure. That had been done in the ancient period, but the idea of it was kind of lost. So Donatello sort of brought that back. Michelangelo clearly knew what Donatello was doing. Michelangelo is a very young man in 1503, sculpted his David. We don't really know what he would have done had he been able to choose his own block of stone. He was given a very tall, narrow block of stone, so his kind of frontal image may have been different had he had a different piece of marble to work with. That's 1503, though. 1506, the sculpture you see in the bottom right, excuse me, that's the Laocoon. That was discovered in 1506, 3 years after Michelangelo sculpted his version of David. So that's an ancient Roman sculpture, this one. A Roman farmer was plowing his field and kind of, dug it up. So check that out. The movement, the kind of realism in the bodies, all this stuff is going on, and the drama. So that really informed sculpture and influenced sculpture going forward, and you end up with Bernini's David, okay? So you can kind of see how the kind of looking back to the Roman period really, and during the Renaissance, then informed Baroque sculpture. Still for Scipione Borghese, this sculptural group is Apollo and Daphne. Apollo, the god, is chasing the nymph Daphne, and she is totally uninterested. So she turns herself into a tree. Her fingers sprout leaves, her toes sprout roots, and then as soon as Apollo gets to her and kind of grabs her hip, she transforms, her skin transforms into bark. So he just grabs this piece of bark. Again, look at the lovely textural differences between the bark and the skin. Just amazing, amazing work. Here are 3 portrait busts by Bernini of 3 people who were very, very important in his life. Scipione Borghese, who we were just talking about, the patron in marble, in the act of speaking. Looks like he's about to sit down and have a glass of wine with a friend. In the middle, Pope Urban VIII Barberini, in bronze, of course. And here we have this very somber mix of piety and pomp as well, with the papal mitre. And then the woman that is a bust of Costanza Bonarelli. She is Bernini's, or was Bernini's, lover. She tormented him to no end, had an affair with his brother even, so he was eventually able to move on, but he did in fact sculpt her. So interesting to see that he's a very versatile artist in different medium, but also he can do the mythological group as well as these just very touching busts. Let's take a look at the Coronado Chapel. Interesting for the architectural setting that Bernini designed to include the main figural group of Saint Teresa of Avila. She is a mystical saint. She's having her mystical vision. I'll give you a close-up in a minute, but she's been placed in this niche with this very interesting architecture. See the pediment? This is the triangular pediment from the Pantheon, only it's been exploded outward. So now they call it a broken pediment. Kind of hallmark of the Baroque. Kind of frou-frou decoration here with the Corinthian capitals, all of this different colors of stone. And then the sides of the chapel are part of the scene as well, and the onlookers are kind of in theater boxes. Bernini also worked for the theater, so he ended up doing this. So on the left, you see Saint Teresa of Avila. She's having her mystical vision. So her body, her limbs and her head are kind of abandoned, and the kind of inner kind of activity of this, this amazing kind of mystical vision has kind of gotten her drapery up in an uproar. Look at all of the kind of amazing movement in her drapery. And then there's this beautiful little angel who's just kind of delicately going to pierce her heart with divine love. Beautiful sculpture, very, very moving. Obviously more moving in person than in this tiny little slide. It's worth a visit to Rome. And then on the right, this is one of those theater boxes with the onlookers, and they are contemporary Romans, members of the family who, the Coronado family who commissioned this chapel. And then very great, just wonderful use, Donatello-like use of low relief to create an illusion of very deep space. Let's take a look at some architecture. Bernini did so much, it's really hard to cram all this into a very short period of time. So I'm just kind of showing you really some examples of the kinds of things that he left in Rome when he kind of made his mark. As a very young architect, he was asked to do this as a private residence, palazzo for Ludovico Ludovisi. And it's actually the building, the House of Parliament today. So it kind of looks like it was built to be the Parliament building. What I love about this is that the restraint that is used here, Bernini certainly could do Baroque architecture that looks like that, but he knew better than to try to put that on the exterior of this enormous building. So he really managed to get this building to work with its site, and he kind of curves it into the piazza where it's sitting, and he kind of breaks up the facade with these pairs of really tall Corinthian pilasters. And that's kind of the decoration. And then he uses those alternating window treatments, which we also saw in the Pantheon. I don't know if y'all noticed them, but round, pointy, just to give it a little bit of a variety without overdoing it. And then this is early Bernini. Later in his career, he designed Sant'Andrea al Quirinale, gorgeous little church, absolutely gorgeous, in the round, but not round, oval. And the interior is that classic sort of Baroque kind of, a lot going on, different colors of marble, literally gilt dome with all the natural light coming in. And then the facade is just absolute beautiful and serene. He had a hard site to work with. It's very narrow, you can see here. This street kind of ends in this church. So he only had this much space to create this entire facade. And he decided to do that again. Look, he reused those big, tall Corinthian pilasters. This is extremely tall. Here's a car, okay? So he could have easily done that first register down here of, Doric columns and then put some Corinthian columns on the top. But he chose to go, just go with these nice, solid, very tall Corinthian columns. And then to give the doorway some humanity, kind of bring it down to our level, he says, adorable, just cute little portico, kind of tettoia thing sticking out. And then I love his use of the lava flow staircase. He didn't invent this. Other architects used it. Michelangelo used it in the Laurentian Library, among other architects. And Bernini, though, it just makes this building, I think, just gorgeous. A couple other of Bernini's public monuments. This is the base for a Egyptian obelisk that was discovered on the site of Santa Maria sopra Minerva, the Church of St. Mary on top of the Temple of Minerva. And Bernini did this great, cute little elephant. It's kind of playful, but he's just the way that elephant is turning his head, the way his ears are moving, and then his trunk really, again, brings you around. It's Bernini's way of bringing the viewer around the sculpture. Here's a quick look at Bernini's working methods. He would sketch in clay. So he made these little clay models. He's working through his ideas here. He was also showing these to his patrons so that they could have an idea of where he was going with any sort of the project he was working on. This was his way of carrying it forward. And then he would also give these to his workshop assistants. So he, of course, could not possibly sculpt all of what he was designing. He had tons of very big commissions. He worked everything out in small scale in clay. Some things life size he did himself, but then he had his collaborators who would then sometimes elaborate on his models to make the full scale figures. This is the Fountain of the Four Rivers in Piazza Navona. Like a lot of y'all have probably been here too. And again, another one of these Egyptian obelisks. The ancient Romans brought these in from Egypt, and then during the Renaissance, they were re-erected. Renaissance and Baroque period, they would put them up. So we've got a public fountain with the obelisk. And if you notice the obelisk, the huge weight of this stone obelisk is hovering over a void, very similar to what we saw with the throne of St. Peter. Castel Sant Angelo, this was the mausoleum of Hadrian, built in the 130s AD and then later used as a papal residence and stronghold. Bernini was asked to design the statues that kind of, it's a pedestrian bridge. So as you walk across the bridge, you see these 10 angels. They're all carrying instruments of the Passion of Christ. Here's a close-up of a clay model on the left and then two of the full-size figures on the right. They're quite dramatic, and they're quite that idea of inspiring piety is such that the Pope who commissioned this actually kept several of the figures for himself. That was Clement IX. And they had to be recreated to put up on the bridge. Bernini also had international fame. He was called to Paris by Louis XIV. You can see an equestrian monument that's at Versailles, and then this great epitome of the Baroque portrait bust in sculpture. So Bernini here this is in Versailles as well. Louis XIV, the Sun King. This is done in the late 1660s. So Bernini's kind of getting up there in years. And he manages to kind of capture all of that pomp and circumstance of the French king with all of that hair and the drapery. And yet look at his face, like the insight of this king is just piercing. Back in Rome, this is Bernini's last work, and it is the Funerary Monument, the tomb of Alexander VII, Kiji. So this is the guy who commissioned the Colonnade. This is his funerary monument, and it's actually over that doorway. When you walk in to the side of St. Peter's, if any of y'all have been on a Vatican tour with me, when you walk in that side door and you look up, this is the door, and you literally walk up and you see the foot of a skeleton. So this is this funerary monument done by Bernini at age 80. And it's got, first of all, this just gorgeous jasper stone, heavy, heavy textile, kind of enveloping these figures. You're looking at truth here, allegories. You're looking at truth here on the right. And then Pope Alexander himself is very humbly kneeling in prayer. And of course, you're looking at this, the finished sculpture here, and then the clay bozzetto on the right. So it's reduced to the pure minimum, and he's shown without the kind of fancy headgear. He's not wearing his fancy robes. He's wearing just a regular kind of humble priest robes, and he's kneeling, and death is coming up from under the tapestry. And so that's the foot you see when you walk in, the skeleton of death who's holding the hourglass, just in case you forgot that life is short, and it is. So that's a very fast overview of Bernini. we're now going to go out to supper in Rome. And when you go to supper in Rome, you're often in these very humble trattorie. And these kind of neighborhood restaurants are all over Rome. And Romans eat out a lot, and this is where they go. It's kind of hard to even find a place in here. So if you have to reserve a table, even during the week, these places are packed. So this is the food we're going to make today: saltimbocca and stuffed tomatoes. Those are the ingredients I'm going to use. And of course, tomorrow I will send you the recipes. The pasta at the bottom is sort of a little tempter for next time we talk about Rome. I'm going to take y'all into the kitchen here. And so next time we talk about Rome, we're going to talk about those pasta dishes. And they are sort of the iconic Roman pasta dishes. They are cacio e pepe and grisha, carbonara, and amatriciana. So we'll be talking about that in one of our next sessions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So now we're in the kitchen. So if y'all want to see me, you need to pin my screen. I'm going to pin my own screen. Go to the top right corner of my little Hollywood square and click on the 3 dots and then click pin video. Okay, so we're in the kitchen of this house I rented at the beach, and it's not exactly outfitted the way my kitchen is, but we're going to make it work. So we're going to make saltimbocca and stuffed tomatoes. I'm going to show you the tomatoes first. They're going to go in the oven for half an hour. And this is a pretty simple recipe, but the beauty of it is that the rice cooks in the tomato juice. So you put the rice inside the tomato, and then it bakes in the oven, and the tomato juice cooks the rice, so it just soaks up all that pure tomato flavor. So what you need to do to start is hollow out a tomato. So I've already done one. I'm going to do another one. You need a serrated knife for this, and this is the knife of the Cucina dell'Amore. This is the typical kitchen knife of every Italian kitchen. You have to have some serrations or it's not going to work. This kitchen, the person who lives here, who I rented this from, does not cook. So I had to buy myself a knife. I paid $2.50 for a pack of 6. Look at it. It's great. It does everything. Italian women cut bread with this. They hold the bread here and they slice this is often the only knife in a kitchen, okay? You don't need anything more than this. So I'm gonna take the top off of this tomato. You wanna be careful to leave yourself enough room to get the rice down in there. So we're just gonna take the top off. You have to have serrations for this. Top off. And then kind of cut, you wanna be careful it's so juicy. You wanna be careful not to cut the outside because you need to preserve your container. But if you help yourself by just kind of cutting through the ribs of the tomato, this thing's so juicy I can't show it to you because it's gonna go everywhere. You wanna save your juice because that's what's gonna cook the tomato. So in a bowl, save the tomato juice. So you cut around the edge, take a spoon, and just kind of scoop out the flesh of the tomato. Okay? Preserving the container.
Tomato looks beautiful.
Great, isn't that great? So this is very seasonal, obviously. Some of the famous Roman recipes are things like artichokes made in all sorts of different ways, but it's summer. So
are they really large?
They're not huge. These are kind of medium-sized tomatoes. You can use any size you want, just judge how much. I'm going to send you the recipe. If your tomatoes are bigger than that, maybe use a tablespoon more of rice. So once you get the flesh out of the tomato, just use your hands to squish it. You're just squishing it into a mush, okay? You just bring the liquid out, save all the liquid, save all the pulp. Mash it up, just kind of turn it into almost kind of a paste.
Elaine,
so yeah.
This recipe is going to be great because we now have Smith County tomatoes are in season.
Right, exactly. That's the point.
Yeah.
So use your seasonal produce to make this recipe. So I just put some salt in. You kind of want to spice it up good. So salt, rice, and I'm going to use a little bit of hot pepper. This pepper's super hot, so I'm not going to use very much of it. I'll show you all this in a second. And then I'm also going to use a lot of basil. And I asked my friend Turri, my Calabrian friend here in Badolato, I knew he had a garden. I said, can you please bring me some aromatic herbs? I need some sage and I need some basil. So we met in the Piazza last night after supper, you know, midnight in the Piazza, and Turi has picked these for me, and look at this. Can you imagine that? Isn't that cute? We were all very impressed. So, and the perfume here, the earth down here and the sun is just, they've got a kind of special microclimate going on, and I've never smelled sage so perfumed, ever. I was saying to my friends, like, smell this sage, like we can smell it from here. It's like the entire Piazza smelled like sage last night. So I'm just gonna cut a good bit of basil. And it's good with a lot of basil. I'm gonna put in some more. So this is kind of a good example of the 3-ingredient rule of Italian cooking, which is you only need 3 ingredients and they all better be really, really good. That's the secret to these recipes. So there we go. I'm gonna add a little bit of olive oil. Here we go. Actually, I just realized that I spoke too soon. I'm gonna save some of my plain tomato saved for the other little touch here, which is potatoes. Okay, so I'm just mix all this up, add oil, which helps, you know, the oil brings out the basil and also the hot pepper flavor. So this mixture just gets mixed up and then sits for kind of 30 minutes, 45 minutes. If you have an hour, that's even better. So the rice, of course, is absorbing liquid while it sits here. That way, once it goes in the oven, it's kind of ready to go and starts to cook right away. So this sort of resting period is necessary. So you have to think ahead a little bit. You can go ahead and put it in the tomatoes. So the way they do this in Rome is the rice goes into the tomatoes. You fill it up about 2/3 full, although usually you have a lot of filling and you can just stuff it on in there. So let's see, the next recipe we're going to make is also a good example of the 3-ingredient rule. This one's a little bit more, you can kind of be a little bit more creative with this one, I think. For all of those of you who, I'm going to add some potato, just chunks of potato. So for all of those of you who like to play around with my recipes, and you know who you are, and I know who you are, you can play around with this one, okay? You're allowed. But you know, if you want to add, I don't know, add black pepper instead of red pepper or some other spices. I know some of y'all are dying to add cheese to this. It's coming, I can feel it over the cyber, you know, virtual airwaves here. I can tell y'all are dying to add some cheese. If you have to do it, go ahead. I don't think it needs it, which is why I'm not using it. But if you have to have it, then go for it. All right, potato.
What are you cutting up?
What?
What are you cutting now? What was that you
A
were cutting?
potato.
Oh, a potato. Okay.
Yeah, and I was talking about you, by the way.
I know you were. Thank you. I finally learned the difference between the Coliseum and St. Peter's today. Thank you, smarty.
All right, that was a potato. Salt, olive oil. I'm using a Sicilian olive oil. Here's just one of those sweet Sicilian olive oils. Goes really well with the tomatoes and the basil. And then the tomato that we were supposed to save before just gets spooned over the potatoes. Okay.
I'm still thinking about the 3-ingredient rule. What do you tell us about that?
Okay. Hang on. Hop back on the tomatoes. What was that? Excuse me.
Oh, I was still thinking you mentioned the 3-ingredient rule, and I'm not sure I used that well. Can you explain that?
I'll explain it because we're about to do it again. So this is your 3 ingredients here, okay? And this goes in the oven, 350 for an hour. After, you have to let it sit first, okay? So I'm going to let this sit, and we're going to proceed. So we're now going to make Saltimbocca, which is very typical Roman trattoria fare. And basically it's a little piece of beef. Like this is the one, do not go mucking up the recipe here. It does not need it. This is just like the most, again, 3 ingredients. It's so flavorful. You get a good piece of meat, some good prosciutto, and some sage, okay? So I have a piece of, I'm using vitellone, which is, you can use veal. I'm using vitellone, which is between veal and regular beef cow. So it's kind of a 2 or 3 year old cow. And I have a very, very thin slice. See that? And I'm actually going to cut this in 2. These are very thin. You eat sort of 2 or 3 when you know, one portion is 2 or 3 of these. So I'm going to cut it up into the portion size. And so the 3 ingredient rule is take advantage of the amazing flavors of really good ingredients. Spend more time shopping than you do in the kitchen. And the goal of the goal of cooking is to exalt the ingredients, not to cover them up. So Italians do not use 10 ingredients and put cheese and spices all over everything. They tend to use, they make sure they get very good ingredients, and they use a couple of kind of enhancers, a little bit of salt, a little bit of olive oil, some basil, good to go. And it really then enhances, like that will enhance the flavor of those great garden fresh tomatoes. You don't need anything else. So I just put some salt on here. I'm gonna put pepper.
So in this little town that you're in, you can find everything you need?
I have to go down to La Marina. So I'm up on the hill here in Badolato. And in order to get, there are a couple small shops up here, but to go shopping, I go down to the kind of, you know, the sea level. All right, prosciutto on top of the meat. And then I'm gonna use 1 piece of sage per thing.
How do you spell the town there? I have someone asking about wanting to look it up.
It's Badolato. Badolato.
Thanks.
Toothpick. So I'm going to just take 1 piece of sage. So I have just, here you go. Meat, prosciutto, sage. Sorry, that looks really gross. And then do that again. So salt, pepper, prosciutto, sage. And now I'm going to run it through some flour. And then we're going to just cook it really quickly in a pan. I'm going to use some Tuscan olive oil. This is Fattoria Rome Bernini from near Florence. A little bit of oil. Hang on a second, I have to turn this on. This is a complicated oven stove operation here. I have to use one of these. I hate these things. Okay, let's see. This one. Oop, there it goes. So this obviously is so thin, it's going to cook really, really, really quickly. I'm going to let this heat up. So these get kind of just passed through flour. I didn't do a very good job here. I'm going to fix it. So pass through flour, cooked in olive oil, and then I'm going to finish it with a little bit of white wine. The oil and the flour kind of do their thing. The flour gets toasty. Once the wine boils off, it just leaves that, you know, just amazing, amazing kind of deep flavor. And this is so good. It makes its own little sauce. So this is the recipe. Please, those of you who are trying to put a piece of cheese in here, don't do it. You don't need it. Okay.
Is it a violation of law to use other meats as a variation?
Sure, sure. Like chicken or something, you can do that. Like flatten it out, like the meat pounder. Is that, or what else were you thinking?
I'm just playing around with it, with the idea.
You can do that.
It seems like a refined Milanesa in some ways.
Well, that's chicken fried steak. That's different.
very refined milanesa.
But this is, wait till you see how, it's almost done, okay? You can whip this meal together. I mean, literally like that. So I'm just gonna let this cook. Use some wine. I have a lovely, how about this, the grocery store? This is Librandi, a Calabrese producer. They're kind of a big producer, but they've kind of made it possible for all the small producers in Calabria to kind of, you know, get on the books. And this is a blend of Melissa and Greco Bianco. Two very interesting grapes that you don't find anywhere else. Who's ever heard of Melissa? Until you come down here, you don't know about it. Great kind of tangy white wine with some good acidity. And I'm gonna use that in here, and it's gonna go really well with the meal too. How am I gonna turn these things over?
The olive oil was just in the pan. You didn't dip the breaded saltimbocca in any oil beforehand.
Just in the pan. Let's see here. So when the meat, I don't know if I can show you this. When the meat kind of starts to like send some juices up, see the juices that are coming to the surface? That's when it's time to flip it. And then another thing that happens in here is that the fat and prosciutto melt. It's not very much, but it's enough to kind of just like, you know, the fat and the prosciutto, the flour and the wine, and just the little meat juices. So good. My neighbor's daughter goes, oh my God, that's like a drug. Like you just can't stop eating them. I mean, you have to make a whole platter full, and you just absolutely cannot stop eating them.
You have to make a whole platter, or maybe make as much as you think you want to eat.
Exactly. They're kind of good the next. They actually save really well. You can snack on them later.
Oh, nice.
Also, the tomatoes are really good. They're good hot out of the oven, but they're really good the next day. Even just take them out of the fridge and just like let them chill, you know, just a couple minutes out of the fridge and eat them almost cold with some olive oil. They are so good. I mean, it's just the essence of that tomato flavor from some. So I'm gonna flip these back. The prosciutto's kind of gotten toasty on the edges. Now I'm gonna add the wine. I'm just kind of flipping through here so they all get some good flavor. All right, that smells so good. I'm sorry y'all aren't here right now. So as soon as kind of the alcohol burns off, not there yet.
So Elaine, do you use it as an appetizer or a main course?
Main course.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a main course. Like again, you serve for everybody would get sort of 3 of these.
Okay. Thank you. Something loaded or something.
All right, that is done. How fast is that? I'm going to remove this to the plate. And then look at how much, it makes all this kind of yummy sauce. All right, can y'all see that? Look, doesn't that look good? All right, and now with the tomatoes, they're ready. So this is what the tomatoes look like when they're done. They just kind of get all wrinkly and shriveled. The potatoes are all toasty. Everything tastes like tomatoes. It's like, this is the perfect flavor from your garden. I'm gonna try to plate this for y'all. There we go. So how about that? Roman trattoria meal in no time flat.
Looks great. Looks great. Thank you. Pass the plate.
I wish I could. I wish I could. I'll make it for you next time you're here. Y'all have to come.
I'm ready.
As soon as you let us in the country.
As soon as you let us back in. Yeah.
Spectacular. Thank you.
Y'all, does anybody have any questions? Y'all can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Elaine, will you be there in 2 weeks on the next one?
I will be, and we're going to talk about, so in 2 weeks from now, we will kind of explore this area and make some calabrese recipes, and I'm hoping to have a guest star or two, so I'm working on that for y'all.
Great.
Okay.
So what is that region known for as far as food?
I'm going to go, let's go back outside. You want to?
Yes.
They are known for lots of really good vegetable dishes. So for any of y'all who came in late, this is where I am. It's Badolato in Calabria. They are known for really good, flavorful vegetable dishes. And in the area where I am, the most typical dishes are things like stuffed eggplant, which you find all over the place. Like all the little old ladies make stuffed eggplant. Eggplant Parmigiana, which I'm hoping to find somebody to teach me how to do it because I don't know how to do it, and that's my goal when I'm down here. And they do it with hardly any tomato and some hard-boiled egg. It is yummy. It is so good. So hopefully we'll discover the secret to that. And they make things like pipi e patate, which are potatoes and peppers, and sausages and peppers. And they eat things like goat. I will not be making. But if you were here, we could go out and get some goat. And they do things like they cook the goat, they form it, they put clay around it, and then put it in a wood-burning oven and then bust the clay open, and it kind of steams in there. They do stuff like that. There are lots of cheesemakers down here, so you get all sorts of yummy cheeses and all these really interesting wines. It's fun to go explore, and the food culture, they're really into it. So you can always get kind of lots of really good ingredients and fun recipes.
Can't wait. I can't wait.
So what is it?
What about breads, Elaine?
Oh, very good bread. They use, I don't have any in the house right now. They use rimascinata, which is very finely ground hard wheat. So like we call semolina, but super flavorful, very finely ground, kind of that yellowy flour. And that's what they make their bread out of. It's really kind of toothy and super flavorful. Really, it's very spectacular.
Salt? Do they salt?
No, T90, Fort say a little tiny bit.
Elaine, we were able to hear some roosters, but at the same time, it looks like a city or a town. Were pretty close to you, those roosters?
The roosters are right
Everywhere.
down there. I can't see them right now. They're in that little enclosure down there. I don't see them right now. And that's my friend Pepe's garden. Pepe.
Oh.
And then here you can kind of see the city is kind of on the peak of this little hill.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Lord have mercy.
The sea down below.
Oh, lovely, lovely.
Gorgeous.
It's very, very pleasant, and I'm happy to be here. When we were in lockdown, because a lot of my friends come down here, I mean, a lot of them were probably, I mean, literally, 30 or 40 of us. And we love it down here because the beaches are open. It's not all full of chairs and umbrellas and stuff. So it's just miles of open beach, gorgeous water. And when we were in lockdown, we kept saying, if we're good now, we get to go to Badolato in August. If we're good now, we get to go to the beach. We just kept telling ourselves that. And now we're all like, we did it and we're here. Everybody's like, this is such a horrible year. And we've all been through such, just difficult.
Blessed. Beautiful.
Yeah.
We did it. And here we are.
Elaine,
Elaine, talk a little bit about how you did lockdown. We've got a lot of new people. Would you tell them how y'all did lockdown, where you had to go grocery shopping?
We had to have, our lockdown was lockdown. As of tomorrow, you do not leave your house unless you are buying food or you have a medical emergency. And if you're buying food, one person per household got to go out to buy food. Once every 7 to 10 days. You were only allowed to shop in your municipality, so you could not cross the county line to go to your favorite store. You had to go to the store that was closest, within your municipality. And we had to take with us, and they called it an auto certificazione. We had to fill out a form with, I had to give them my, date of birth, place of birth, residence, my official, my ID card number, where I was coming from, where I was going. And I actually never got stopped, but a ton of my friends got stopped. You had to show that if you were going shopping, show me the receipts, show me the bag of food. And they were very strict about it. And it was punishable with a fine. And there were, if you were suspected to have the virus or diagnosed, and you were supposed to be, we were kind of isolating, but if you're supposed to be in quarantine, that was punishable with jail time. If you broke your quarantine and you were out spreading it around, then they were throwing you in jail after you got well, of course. But they did not play around at all. They did not play around, and it was difficult. And it was literally from one day to the next. And they tried to lock down Lombardy, the whole country. They actually nipped it in the bud because Lombardy was the hardest hit. And they tried to just lock down Lombardy, but of course people started, tons of people from here work in Milan, like, we're going home, we're not dealing with this. So everybody, lots of folks decided to just escape. And not 24 hours later, they said, okay, then everybody's on lockdown. Nobody's going anywhere. We're all in the same boat. And we were all in the same boat. Nobody could go anywhere. And that made it a lot easier to just deal with it because nobody could leave their house. Nobody. It's not like my friends were out having a drink in the Piazza and I was at home by myself. We were all in our house from March the 10th until, I guess it was May the 18th. After that point, we were allowed to move around a little bit. We could go out and about sort of we couldn't cross the state lines, but we could move around and, didn't have to use my auto certification form. I had a work meeting. I drove an hour south for a work meeting. Sometime in June, we were allowed to cross the regional lines. And then on July, I think it was July 3rd or 4th, they actually opened up some European Union borders. So but that's from March 9th. That's how long it took. And here we are, we're at the beach. So it was hard. It really worked. Just so I had a friend of mine, a colleague, a client wrote me and said, she asked how it was going. I kind of told her, and she said that it sounded to her from what she was reading in the news that all of Italy was really hard hit. And it was not. Italy managed to keep the kind of horrific stuff, the overwhelmed hospitals and all that. That was only in the north. It was in Milan and Bergamo. And then, Florence is a big city. There was a lot of contagion there, but the hospitals, they were never overwhelmed. They always had ICU beds for everybody because the lockdown kind of, that's flattening the curve. We've all heard that term 1,000 times, but, and then down here in the South, single digit case numbers.
So everybody in
an insistence on mask use all the time, and does that continue?
Oh, I have masks. I brought a stack of masks that big. So if you're inside of a store, you're socially distancing, you're wearing a mask. Even now, there's no cases down here, but they want to keep it that way. And, I'm here and I'm from Florence and my friend is here and she's from Milan. So they're being super careful. Stores are still doing, depending on like the square footage of the store, X number of people are allowed in at once. So you often have to wait outside distance. And if you're in the store, then mask on. And if I'm in a city, I usually keep my mask on anyway, or I keep it, if I cross paths with somebody on the sidewalk, I put my mask on just to be nice, or in the post office or whatever. You're not protecting yourself, you're protecting everybody else. So everybody's got masks and distancing and all that.
Beautiful.
It's
Oh,
great.
thank you so much for tuning in. I'm happy to see everybody here, and I'm happy our numbers are growing. Tell all your friends, anybody who might be interested in our virtual visits. Pass the word.
Okay.
Thank you.
Elaine, question for you. How far are you from the ocean?
Oh,
I can see it, but
it's not even 10 minutes. You can walk if you want. It's kind of a hike, but
The next time, would you go to the beach for those of us who cannot go to the beach?
yeah, really.
oh, did you see the picture in the beginning of the water?
Yeah.
Yes, yesterday a storm came through. I'm not sure if this is going to work. Yesterday the storm came through, and you know how sometimes that turns the water a funny color?
Yeah.
I've never seen, I don't know. Hang on.
Wow.
Is that crazy?
Wonderful.
Oh my God.
Crazy.
I want to go there.
Come on over.
Pretty color.
Or the Fishburnes on the line. The Fishburnes have been here. They join us sometimes. If they're on the line, they can tell you about it. Oh, they may not be on the line tonight. So,
Okay.
well, y'all, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. I wish I could
Thank
offer you
you.
like a slice of Saltimbocca.
Thank you, Elaine.
That's it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
Elaine.
recipes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. You're
Okay. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you,
So
Elaine.
much.
Told
Thank
me
you.
about it.
Buonasera.
See everybody.
Look how beautiful it is, this town.
If I be back, you can see, get a better view.